Here's the headline. If you've got roughly €100 or so, or the equivalent to spend on a case, and you're not considering this, you need help. And I'm going to provide you that help. First thing, this was sent to me by Endorfy. I'm not paid by them for this review, but I do get the case to make a video of. So, disclaimer out of the way, welcome to the Arx 500 Air. I'm not fully convinced that's a great name, but it's a new case from Endorfy, previously sent in PC, and whatever the reason for the change of name, or the name of this case, if it's got anything to do with how amazing this case is, I'm all for it. No hyperbole included, this thing is an absolute beast in the film performance department and includes all the quality of life features you'd want and some I didn't know I wanted, like stuff I haven't seen before on any case. I just can't see any major downsides to this thing. It's absolutely toe-to-toe with the big guys in the space. So let's not drag this out any further, here are all the details. Starting at the start, the packaging is mostly standard hard polystyrene with a sheet of closed cell foam for the glass side panel where it counts. Taking a step back for just a second, let's take note of some of the marketing claims made by the manufacturer. So 5 140mm fans, that's a lot, and they are all here. There's also an ARGB version with 4 140mm ARGB PWM fans for an extra €10 or pounds. Point 2 is maximum airflow as standard, so they've done the thinking so you don't have to, and with all those fans it's pretty hard to miss opportunities for more airflow, so they've got that sorted. A perforated steel front panel as the dust filter to reduce air resistance. True, it is one sheet of perforated steel, no extra filter inside, and that will reduce the air resistance, which is good. And lastly, lots of radiator space and lots of cable management support and easy access fan rails. And that's all true, but we'll cover the details of those more in a second. So, good start, no BS in all of that. Let's take a closer look. Front-wise, we've pretty much covered that. It's a very clean look, masking a set of 3 140mm fans, and there are side strip vents for a touch more airflow, and their clean new logo is front and center. The front panel is actually 2 separate pieces. The central piece is held in place by 2 tongues and 3 upper magnets. It's amazingly easy to remove to access the fans or just clean. The frame can be removed with a bit of brute force, but there's no need to since all the access you'll need is handled by the inner panel. The glass side panel is, well, it's a normal side panel. It's held in place with a couple of retained thumb screws, which I'd normally complain about, but they've actually extended the shaft of the screw way further than any other case retained thumb screw that I've seen, which makes them actually consistently usable. The only thing I could complain about is the lack of a ridge for the panel to rest on when it's being removed so it doesn't drop, but that's about it. It's the same mechanism for the other side panel, only that side is steel. To the rear, it's your traditional layout, lower power supply unit section, mid PCI Express slot section, and upper fan and motherboard section with a high top for radiator support. Note the fan position has one of the 5 140mm fans, which is a little strange since most cases only support 120mm fans here. This also expands the CPU cooler and graphics card width clearance to 179mm, which is super overkill for the market, but means you can pretty much throw whatever you want into this thing. Speaking of the graphics card, the slot cover is above and beyond. The mainstream premium touch is typically a sliding plate with a thumb screw. That's just not good enough for this case. Instead, we get a cover, hinge, and a magnet. It's kind of overkill, but I'm not complaining. Also, there's no PCI Express snap-off covers in sight, which should be standard at this price range, but I've reviewed 2 cases very recently at the same price range, and they couldn't step over that very low bar. Anyway, up top is a very solid but also perforated steel panel which oozes quality. Similar to something like the O11 Dynamic Mini, there's a thumb screw to the rear which frees it up to slide back and off. Here's where the 5th fan is hiding, with plenty more space for fans and radiators. Heading to the front is the front I/O. Type-C and A ports are here with mic and headphone jacks and your standard lighting, power and reset buttons. So very up to date. Another nice touch here is this properly depressing power switch. It feels like a switch from 20 years ago, from the good old days when monitors were as deep as they were wide. It's not a must-have, but like how Volkswagen go on about the sound of their doors closing, it gives the case a nice premium feel instead of the tinny clicky switch that most other cases go with, and the same ones that come with every starter Arduino pack. Back on track, the base has a lot going on. First is the massive lower filter. It's the same as most other normal filters, being a perforated plastic sheet with magnetic perimeter strips. It's fine and can be used well enough without tipping the case over, but it's not ideal for a lower filter since it's a little floppy and the strips create a little bit of more friction than you'd like, which can make a blind replacement a little awkward. However, there are loads of guides and actually a hidden stop to the rear, so they've done their due diligence. The feet hold some nice, rather sizable foam pads, not the most durable solution compared to rubber pads, but they are very big and are great for sliding your system around your desk with easy access to the rear. We'll cover the rest of the basement in just a second, but let's get inside and start with the fans and radiator support. The general specs are in the border, but I want to focus on the front, which is where most of the detail is. I almost got caught out by the fan bracket since I didn't see any obvious 120mm support, but the designers have been extra clever here. Instead of offering a static bracket or part of the chassis with slots for each fan size, which would result in a rail covering part of the valuable airflow being provided by the 140mm fans, they provided a more dynamic set of brackets that fix to your fans first, and then whether they're 120 or 140mm fans, the relevant holes to the sides of the frame will align with the chassis. This is a performance first approach, and you'll see the results of this in just a second towards the end of the video. But it's worth noting that your internal and external limitations for fans and radiators will depend on which way round you install or mount those brackets. Check the border out for more details on specific dimensions. All the other positions are very standard, no complaints that I could find. It is worth noting though that there is a basement fan position which I think would be very handy for mounting a pump res combo unit. I've never found much performance benefit by using basement shroud fans, at least in the noise normalized department. There's also a 5-fan PWM splitter that everything feeds into, which can connect to your motherboard and control everything from one header. If you wanted extra fans connected to this, you could use a splitter cable. Just make sure you don't overload the likely 1 amp capacity of your motherboard's headers. Moving on to the motherboard, we get a standoff post in the center, which is very standard these days, but still great to have. Max board support is ATX, and the CPU cooler support goes up to 179mm, which I've confirmed with my own measurements. Is it worth making the case extra wide enough to support 179mm tall air coolers and a rear 140mm fan? From my perspective, not really, but it's not that much wider, I guess, only a couple of centimeters or 3/4 of an inch. It's really up to you if that's too wide. Graphics card support is good, just shy of a 350mm with the standard fan bracket position, fan to the outside of the bracket, and 179mm wide due to the width of the case. Installation wise, it's super easy, especially with that PCI Express screw cover panel, and that's all that can really be said about that. Oh, actually, I forgot to mention, there is a specific grommet right below the power section, or the expected power section of your graphics card. A nice extra touch, but that's all that can really be said about that. Top marks all over. As for drive support, it's excellent from my perspective. All drives use these grommets, which are fixed to their drives with their respective screws. Just make sure you don't use the 3.5-inch ones. With the 2.5-inch ones, you'll just destroy the threads. The 2.5-inch drives can go either above the basement shroud in the main compartment or to the rear of the motherboard. Old batteries. 2.5-inch drives can either go above the basement shroud in the main compartment or to the rear of the motherboard, 2 in each position, and you get grommets for all those as well. Or you can add a 5th to the floor of the basement or opt for a single 3.5-inch drive here if you need, which can be fixed in place with an included thumb screw so it doesn't accidentally fall out, maybe if you're transporting your system. I would like to see an option to install a second 3.5-inch drive to the roof of the basement to make this case a little more data hoarder or content creator friendly, similar to the Fractal North I just covered, but that's probably more of a step too far. for most people's needs. As for the power supply unit, like the Fractal North, you get a plate that comes off and mounts to your power supply unit, and then you slot the whole unit in as a whole, but this one uses 4 thumb screws and has a couple of guides to help with alignment on top of the extra long thumb screws. Little details like that make for an extra easy build process. As for the power supply unit support, it's above average with 196mm of clearance with a 3.5-inch drive. Now, that's 196mm of clearance, so you'll want some extra room for the cables to exit your power supply unit, but I'd say that you've easily got enough room for a 180mm power supply unit since there isn't a bulky drive cage to contend with. If you don't have any drives, you could go up to a 310mm long power supply unit, but that's only an excuse for me to show you the end of the basement shroud, which caps off the basement so your cables don't get stuck in your fan blades. Speaking of which, covering cable management before we get into the performance, it's a builder's dream. Alongside the basement shroud cover, you get loads of Velcro straps. There are grommets all over the place, including a really cool one right below your graphics card power connector area, and there are more cable management loops than I've ever seen in a case. I counted 34 in total, including the one to the rear fan cable position, but I'm sure I've missed a couple somewhere. There are even a few slots in the motherboard tray which highlight the potential for graphics card support brackets in maybe pre-built cases, and I'd be stoked if this was an option for a pre-built. The space behind the motherboard tray is plentiful without the space in the basement, but without a drive cage there's even more room for extra cables than usual. So there we go, that's the whole overview section of the review out of the way. Let's cover performance. I'll keep it super short this time since it's pretty simple, super short relatively. This is one of my videos after all. Full Fantasy Performance puts the ARX or the Arx 500 Air at the top of the board by nearly a whole degree above the Fractal Torrent with its 180mm fans. Looking at the CPU thermals across both tests, 10 minutes of Priority 5 with Firmark and 10 minutes of Firestrike combo, it's in second place to the Torrent Compact, and it's in second place to the NZXT H510 Flow in GPU thermals, but neither of those in first for both did so well in both, so the Arx 500 Air takes the average trophy. Now, that performance comes at the cost of noise, but while it's best in the performance, thermally, it's only the 5th loudest, quieter than the Fractal Torrent Compact by 6 decibels. They're 1200 RPM fans, by the way, so there's plenty of space to reduce their speed to make it a bit quieter. Speaking of which, let's move on to the noise normalized testing, the most important in my opinion. Now, it shocked me when I dumped all of the test results from the test system into the spreadsheet on my main system to see the Arx 500 Air take the win in both test type categories. The H510 Flow has been in the lead for so long that I just didn't see anything performing better just for a long time. So yes, it's the best here too. But again, it's not quite the absolute best. It's 4th best in the CPU thermal score department. Technically the 5th coolest, not the 4th coolest, but it's actually cooler where it counts, which takes it up to 4th. It's all about where there are hotter testing, it's slightly cooler than in the cooler testing with Firestrike, where it's not actually performing quite as aggressively. But yeah, it's cooler where it counts, so it gets the 4th position. But it's a clear second in the GPU thermal department, so overall it's the best on the board. The fans were running at 1040 RPM on average, if you wanted to know. CPU and GPU fans are locked all throughout all the testing, so they're not affecting the case performance, as it were. So now it's time for the final scores. Category 1 is the specification and fan bonus scoring. The specification or volume efficiency scoring looks like this. The Arx 500 Air doing mediocrely, neither great nor bad. But since it comes with 5 fans, or 5 good 140mm fans, the bonus score formula sends it up to 1st place. Well, first out of all the cases that I've tested. The NR200P at the top, I haven't tested, but it is the absolute best regarding space efficiency based on case specification spreadsheet that I use to calculate all the scoring. It has over 300 cases in it so far. Category 2, the thermal performance scoring, has the Arx 500 Air comfortably in 1st place. Since it's the best I've tested, it's at 100% and everything scales from there. As for build quality, it sits in the middle of the pack. Great packaging, good panels and average paint and filters. That results in a near 65% score for build quality. And lastly, the installation ease scoring, it's in 4th place. The only main letdown is the lack of power supply nut screws with the case. They do say to use, in the manual, to use the screws that come with your power supply in it, which is completely fair, but most cases come with them, or with some at least, and it's a standard that I test all cases on, so it does lose a chunk of points. Overall, total score-wise, it only loses 1.25 percentage points because of this, so nothing to be overly concerned about. You could just imagine an extra 1.25% points if that matters to you. Significantly, it still gets over 90% comfortably here. So overall, for the total score, it's in 2nd place, just behind the Fractal North Mesh. After bonus and penalty points, it moves down to 4th since the 011 Dynamic Mini gets a bunch of rear panels with the case that makes it super flexible, but that's counted twice for the ATX and ITX testing, so the Arx 500 Air, it was really in 3rd place. However, since the Arx 500 Air is €99, roughly $108, about average in all the cases that I've tested, it actually ends up comfortably in the top quarter of cases in the price versus score graph, which has been updated to reflect today's pricing for all the cases on there. It's way ahead of the Fractal Torrent Compact and North, just ahead of the Lee & Lee 011 Dynamic Mini, and a bit behind the NZXT H510 Flow and the Lee & Lee LANCool 2 and 5. Just before I conclude and wrap up how to interpret all of that stuff, if you were thinking about picking up this or any of the other cases that I've been mentioning, please consider using my Amazon associate links in the video description. It would really help me out at no extra cost to you, as I can earn through those links with qualifying purchases, and it supports me in the process of making these long review videos with all the testing and everything that goes into it. So moving past that, here's how I'd interpret all the data I've just jumped onto you. If you're considering a new ATX case, unless you haven't got a budget in mind or you really like something lower down the price versus score list, like say the Johnsbow D40, which is an interesting case in its own right, or the really pricey Fractal cases, I would disregard the lower half of the price versus score graph. There's just not enough value in there if you're money conscious. Otherwise, if you are money conscious, think about what's really important to you. If performance is the most important thing, this is the best I've tested, hands down, and I'd hazard to guess it's the top percent of all cases on the market in the thermal and acoustic performance department. But that doesn't mean that the H510 Flow and the LANCool 2 and 5 are bad. They're just slightly not quite as amazing as this is on average. Heck, I'd be tempted to switch out for this if it had an extra couple of 3.5-inch drive positions, because I'm a bit of a data hoarder, so there we go. Anyway, before I ramble, if build quality is the hill you're willing to die on, then the 011 Dynamic Mini is the monster that you want. But again, the H510 Flow and LANCool 2 and 5 are also great. There aren't many bad cases regarding installation ease, so anything is fine as long as it's not the U110, but you weren't really considering that if you had a budget anyway. But if squeezing the most into any given case relative to its size is what turns you on, this is the one to go for, or the LANCool 2 and 5. Overall, I am amazed at how good this thing is. It is fantastic. Endorfy is punching well above its weight as far as I'm concerned for a company that's relatively new to the game. We all know Lee & Lee and NZXT, but Endorfy has come out of nowhere with this beast. But to be fair, Celenti and PC always had great value cases, so they laid their foundations well from the get-go. That's all I've got for you on this one. If you have any questions or suggestions, join my Discord and accompany all these awesome people in the credits, or comment down below with any queries or suggestions that you may have. Like, share and subscribe for more. Seriously, subscribing would really help me to grow the channel. Please consider doing so if you want to support me and this channel in doing more of this. Otherwise, thank you so much for checking this one out, and I'll see you in the next one, which will be the Fractal Design Terror. Bye guys.